Okay, at CFA Boston, we have on October 6th, we have institutional adoption of digital assets. On the 14th of October is career chat, bank loans, and structured investments. On October 20th is integrating system level investing into practice management. And on October 21st is the ripple effect of today's decisions, value reporting as a first step to future corporate disclosure. And then October 27th is cybersecurity for advisors. How can they protect against cybercrime? And then November 3rd is understanding the role of the retirement plan fiduciaries, what investment professionals need to know. And then in November 9th is in employee recruiting post-COVID reality check. So Shri, do you have anything for Quant U?
Yeah, so we are starting our fall school from next week onwards. So there are a couple of new courses. If anybody's, I don't think anybody here would be taking any courses, but we have a series of guest lectures which happen every Tuesday, 12 to 1. So you're all welcome to attend. It's free. Next week, we have Rob May, who was the founder of Tala, but is also a VC. And he's going to talk about trends in AI investing. He has been investing in more than 75 artificial intelligence related startups. So if you're interested, I can forward an invite and you're welcome to attend. It's going to be on Zoom, 12 to 1 Tuesdays.
Any other announcements? Dan, do you have any?
Well, just to reiterate that our Newport seminar is October 13th. There's still a few spaces available. We are getting close to capacity. So if anybody wants to come, and sign up soon. And if the website says it's full, shoot me an email. We probably got a couple of hidden spaces that we're saving for last minute clients.
All right. Nicole Boyson is a Ph.D. Professor Nicole Boyson has been at the DeMar McKim School of Business since 2004. She holds a Ph.D. in finance from Ohio State and an MBA from Case Western and a BBA from Kent State. Her research teaching her research and teaching interests fall within the area of household finance and corporate finance and the regulatory arbitrage and management. Her work is published in the highest ranking journals in the field of finance, and she regularly interacts with the media. Prior to joining DBMS faculty in 2004, Professor Boyson was an assistant professor at Purdue University. Prior to joining Purdue, she was a manager at Ernst Young as a VP of investments for pension consulting and Third Federal Savings and Loan and accounting at Peat Marwick and Mitchell. A CPA, Professor Boyson serves as an associate editor of the Corporate Finance Journal and editorial board of the Financial Analyst Journal, and is a member of prestigious organizations, and she was last but not least, she was professor. She was named the professor best teacher in 1984. So anyway, all right, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you.
Nicole, you can share your screen. I made you the co-host.
I'll do that in just a sec. Just to update, thank you. In 1984, I was a junior in high school, so I was not the best professor of anything, but thank you. Also, I wanted to tell you guys this because it's related to CFA. I just accepted the role as a co-editor for the FAJ. So I've been on the advisory board for a long time, and Will Getzman invited me to be one of the co-editors. So I think it's official now. I've got a couple papers, so I think it's real, but I think it'll be officially announced in a little bit. And so I know, since you guys are strongly affiliated with the CFA Society, which is like very near and dear to my heart and important, I'm excited about that. So if you follow me on Twitter, I'll be announcing it shortly. So, but anyway, yeah, super fun. So I'm looking forward to that role. And kind of as I go through my career, kind of moving from just cranking out teaching and research to taking more leadership roles has been really fun. And so presenting to groups like yours, particularly smart, quantitative people with industry focus, it's like those are the people I like to talk to. So in this talk, someone told me there's a rule that you're not supposed to ask me questions for 10 minutes. So if you want to respect that, you can. If you're not, I don't care. Ask me all the questions you want. I'm not planning Q&A at the end, but I will make myself really small, so I won't be able to see like hands in chat. So I don't think you're shy. Just yell out and ask me questions if you have them, and I'll do my best to respond. So I'm going to share my screen, and let me get back to the beginning here of my talk. I was practicing right before I jumped into the meeting, like a good academic does. So let me share my screen here, and I'm going to make myself really small. And so this talk, which Dan has heard, but there's a little bit of update, but this talk is about registered investment advisors. And again, I can't really see you. So, yell right now if you can't hear me, or if something is unclear or there's a problem. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue presenting as if there's nothing happening. So this paper is focused on registered investment advisors who are supposed to be acting as fiduciaries. And I'm focusing on the intersection of the brokerage space and the registered investment advisor space with firms that do both. And so that's these sort of so-called dual registrants. This is my first solo paper in a million years, and it's been really fun to write, but I've been very slow to get it to a journal, partly because COVID hit and I got busy with other things, and partly because it's when you don't have a co-author, you're not always sure when to send it. So the basic kind of idea in this space is that there are two types of financial advisors, and they're supposed to be very distinct from each other, but you don't always see this as being the case. And so what I'm going to try to do is distinguish between the two, and then talk about where the blurring of the lines or the overlap can cause some problems, some conflicts of interest. And so generally speaking, if you have an investment advisor, he could be one of two types. He could be a fiduciary, a registered investment advisor, that's RIA. And that means the SEC has told him, and he's taken a test and promised to act as a fiduciary to his clients, meaning that he will act in their best interest. He will not put his interest above their own. And then there are brokers who have a lower responsibility to their clients. The basic brokerage responsibility, which has changed, which I'll talk about, but certainly during my sample period, which ends in 2016, the basic brokerage responsibility is simply to follow what's called a suitability standard. And a suitability standard means that the broker is required to choose investments that are suitable for his clients. So, you can think of the really classic example. You shouldn't put someone who's 95 years old in some kind of, triple levered ETF or something like that. So the idea is that you want the broker needs to make sure he or she is not putting you in an investment that's completely inappropriate for you. But beyond that, the suitability standard isn't nearly as theoretically restrictive as a fiduciary standard. So in theory, we have sort of these two hats. You could be a fiduciary.
I'm in a webinar. I told you that.
Wait, what? Oh, sorry. So you could be a fiduciary, or you could be a broker. So in theory, there's this really strong differential between fiduciaries who have the RIAs, they have this responsibility to their clients, and brokers who have a slightly different responsibility. But in practice, what we really see the differential is just the way that they charge fees. So fiduciaries, the traditional model is a percentage of assets So they'll charge you, 1% of assets under management. They might charge a flat fee. They might charge an hourly fee. So my Twitter feed is filled with lots of independent advisors who are also fiduciaries, and they argue all the time about what the best fee structure is. So it used to be that percentage of assets was the gold standard. And now you see more and more folks kind of mixing that up. But the point is that they're being paid directly by their client. They're not being paid a commission that's kind of funneled through a third party like a mutual fund. And so in theory, the way that these fees are structured ought to reduce potential conflicts because, if the advisor puts you in good products and your account is doing well, his fees will grow naturally. Where the commission-based broker, you think more of someone who's out there hustling, trying to build a business. Transaction-based fees, whether they're stocks or mutual funds, and we know fees have come down, but obviously commission-based brokers still are out there. But there's this obvious conflict potential. In a really simple world, you've got two mutual funds that are identical. One has a higher load or a higher commission than the other, and you're more tempted to use that one versus the one that has a lower commission. Now, if you're a broker, you shouldn't be expected to sell funds that don't have commissions or not charge a commission, right? You need to make money, but the conflict potential is just much more, I guess, salient in the commission-based space. It's easier to see. Where fiduciaries certainly have conflicts, but the idea is that the fee structure should align their incentives better with their clients than a brokerage firm would. And again, jump in if you have questions. I can't see all of you. I'm going to make myself see most of you here. So at least I feel not too lonely. And so here's the thing though, what you typically see is that most investment advisors are actually dual registered. They wear both hats. And so something like 81% of retail client, I'm defining that as under $100,000, so pretty modest client, use dual registered advisors. And how do I define a dual registrant? Well, a dual registrant is a firm that has an affiliated broker-dealer or a subsidiary broker-dealer. So I'm going to show you some examples here, and I'll come back to the definition in a second. But just to give you a sense, these are the biggest dual registrants as of 2016, end of my sample, that accepted smaller clients. Now, some dual registrants, again, you have both a broker-dealer business and a fiduciary RIA business. Many dual registrants don't accept small clients. Like Goldman Sachs, for example, doesn't take clients below, say, $1 million. But these do. And so I'm listing these as those that accept retail clients because my paper is really about retail clients and the choices they have when it comes to financial advisory. So we can look at some of these big firms, Merrill, Morgan, these are the obvious ones. Others like Wells Fargo, not always getting great press, Ameriprise, Raymond James, Ed Jones. And a lot of these, you drive through any strip mall in any part of the country, and you're going to see a lot of these firms there, right? So there's walk-ins. And so these are the old school broker dealers, right? You call your guy at Ray J and he's like, hey, let's go play golf. I'm gonna buy some stocks for you. And so these firms have really tried hard to transform themselves from kind of that broker model to the RIA model. And so they're dual registrants. They have clients in both categories. And I'll show you later how that mix has changed over time. But these are big firms. And we know they accept retail clients because I read the disclosures and they tell me they do. But you can also look at number of accounts and number of advisors. And clearly, right, there are lots of big clients at these firms. There are a lot of smaller, more modest clients as well. And again, I'm defining retail clients as under $100,000 in assets under management. But many of these firms in their disclosures will say we accept clients with, $10,000, $20,000. So these are really, really modest minimums, as compared to independent registered investment advisors who tend to have much higher minimums, right? So you have a friend, he's an RIA, he's not also a broker, he probably has a minimum of $500,000 or $1 million. And so if I'm a retail client, I kind of have to decide, am I going to DIY? I'm going to use I'm going to use a robo, or I'm going to DIY, do it myself, or am I going to go to a professional? Well, the professional that I'm going to get to choose is probably one of these folks. And again, I am not arguing these are bad, evil people. What I am arguing is that these firms are structured in such a way that their advisors have significant conflicts of interest. And I try to understand those conflicts and then link them to sort of client outcomes. And so kind of taking a step back, the typical advisor at one of these firms has both hats. He's gone to FINRA and got his Series 6 and 7, 63 and all that stuff. And then he goes to the SEC and takes the exam to make him an investment advisor representative, which is part of the registered investment.
Did we lose Nicole? I think she's back. Yeah.
Her screen seemed to freeze.
I think
I'm
she's,
so sorry about that. So my kitchen sometimes can be a little spotty, although I really successfully taught from there in the fall. So I apologize, and I have no idea where we stopped. I was like rambling on. Hopefully, I didn't miss too much. Can maybe someone tell me?
we just lost like 20 seconds, Nicole. So I think we got
Oh,
close.
good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the lighting's better in my kitchen.
You're talking about a conflict of interest. That was,
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So please let me know if you, obviously, if that happens again, it'll be very obvious to me. I'm sharing my screen now, and my internet connection should be a bit stronger here in my living room. So just a quick, just kind of catch myself back up here. So what I was saying was that these firms tend to have really, pretty significant conflicts of interest. And in this paper, I'm trying to understand the conflicts, and I'm also trying to see how they are impacting some of the clients. And so that's kind of my my premise here in this analysis. And so when we look at the big firms, they've got a bunch of retail clients, and these are big dollars that are being managed by some of these dual registrants. And again, being very careful to say this paper is not picking on the individual advisors. This paper is a little bit picking on the big firms, but really more trying to understand the conflicts and how they impact clients. So this graph I kind of like. What I'm showing you here is all the dual registrants and their total assets under management in the RIA side of the business. So this isn't covering the brokerage side of the business, because we're not really supposed to call that assets under management. And you can see that like the blue bar, it's about, $6.3 trillion in 2016. That's overseen by dual registrants. And the purple tells me that the largest dual registrants, 75, I picked 75 a little bit randomly. I wanted to get to a kind of a critical mass, but the largest dual registrants look at, they're advising maybe 80% of the total assets. And you see this always in finance, right? The big banks, the big firms have the most assets. When we look at independent RIAs, and again, I don't have the numbers here, but I can tell you about them. The independent RIAs manage a smaller amount of assets, pretty strong growth here, but they're at like 1.2 trillion versus 6.3 for the dual. And I would say that there are far more independent RIAs, right? There are a ton of really small ones and fewer, obviously, dual RIAs. And in my paper, a lot of the comparisons I'm doing are really between kind of the purple group, the 75 biggest, because I have to read all the disclosure forms, and I can't read, thousands, but I can read hundreds. So the disclosure forms as well for the big ones, and then comparing them to the independent RIAs. And I also focus on the largest independent RIAs. I don't have that bar in this graph, but it also is a pretty substantial portion of all the RIAs that are independent out there. So anyone want to ask any questions, jump in? Makes sense so far? You guys are much more polite than most academics. And so effectively, I've got a couple research questions. So the first one, and I usually start these talks by asking if any of you guys work for these people. So I'm going to decide that. Have any of you guys, I'm going to make you big here. Any of you worked for any of these big firms? Can you raise hand? So I can be, my cynical, critical self. I had to give this talk to a advisory board, and we had a couple people who were kind of both on this side and the mutual fund side of the space. And I was probably a little more careful. But my basic research question is really asking whether dual registered investment advisors have more conflicts. This is a bit of a straw man. The answer is, of course they do. But I want to document what they are and think about where some of these conflicts might have impact on their clients. And so the first thing I show is that they're more likely to have affiliated mutual funds. So you think of like JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, they have dual registrant businesses. They also have a pretty big mutual fund business. And clearly they're going to be steering their clients into their own funds. So some of these, the worst offenders, actually perform less due diligence on their own funds than they might on third-party funds. And you might say, well, that makes sense, right? They're, they know these guys, they work right around the corner. But I'll show later that that doesn't seem to be a great way to run the business, at least in terms of clients. The second thing, which is really what my paper is about, I think this paper, there are some things that I do that have sort of been touched on by other academics, and I sort of round that out. But my work on revenue sharing is really novel. And what I'm showing here is that revenue sharing is defined as a mutual fund family. After they calculate their net income, they take a chunk of it and they effectively share it with a lot of these large dual registrant firms. And so digging into a mutual fund family, you've got, say, like MFS. And MFS has hundreds of different mutual funds. Each of those individual funds has their own balance sheet and income statement. And at the end of the year or quarterly or whatever, they're going to roll up the income from their income statement into the family statement. So MFS is the family. So MFS will take total revenue minus total expenses for their fund family. And whatever's left, net income, they're going to distribute some of that to their dual registrant advisors that they work a lot with. And so one thing that mutual fund families will tell you very loudly is that revenue sharing doesn't come out of each individual fund, right? It's not reflected directly in the expense ratio or in some kind of commission or whatever. It's not a 12B1 fee. This is at the fund family level. Now, of course, I will argue that it doesn't matter much, right? You're pulling the money out of the fund family. One way you can do that is by charging higher fees in your fund, but it's coming at the family level. And the money then goes to dual registrants. The dual registrants demand it, and the money goes to pay for things like seminars. They'll sponsor seminars, conferences, sometimes purchase data, swag. So you can imagine you're a dual registrant. You've got MFS coffee mugs, you've got MFS hats, golf stuff, vests. And the other thing that's probably the more insidious is these funds, the funds that pay the most for many of these dual registrants, are getting on these preferred lists. And so I think of sort of one of my 22-year-old students or someone who maybe didn't finish college, goes and works for one of these firms, go-getter, good salesperson, and they show up and their manager hands them a list and says, we sell, 3,000 mutual funds, but these are the ones we like the best. And there might be 20 on there, maybe there's 50 on there from 10 different families. And these are absolutely the families that revenue share the most. So the firms disclose this all in, not a lot of detail about the dollars, but a fair amount of detail about kind of how they allocate this. And they'll say, the funds who revenue share the most are on our preferred lists. And so being on a preferred list isn't necessarily related to performance or things like that. In many firms, it's very directly related to revenue sharing. And so the conflict here is so obvious, I don't even have to mention it. And I should note that every time I talk about a dual RIA, I'm talking about the RIA side of the business. So this is not the brokerage side of the business. Of course, they do this too, but the RIAs are doing this as well. And recall, the fiduciary duty says you have to put your client's interests first. And so there's clearly a conflict here that I'm just trying to sort of qualify and quantify as best I can. The third one.
I'd
Yes.
just like to ask a question.
Hi,
because,
Adam. Yeah.
maybe things have changed over the last 20 years, but I used to think that, or I still thought until just now, that dual registrants were actually rather scarce. That was what dominated were the registered reps who, until comparatively recently, had no great incentive to register as investment advisors. So can you just explain that a little further?
Absolutely. And it's a great question. And I will say that I'm actually going to give a little history lesson in a few slides. So I'll defer a little bit, but just to summarize it, because I think it's important to understand, these firms around 1990 realized that the asset under management model is a really great model. And so Merrill Lynch kind of started doing that, but they were doing it in their brokerage business, which was, kind of against what the SEC wanted, but the SEC gave them a no action letter and effectively said, it's really interesting. They said, And Merrill was smart about it, right? So Merrill said, look, we have some clients that trade like crazy people, and we really would like to charge them kind of a fixed fee so that they feel comfortable trading like crazy people, right? So we don't want to charge them a commission for every single trade. Why don't we give them what they're calling a wrap fee and call it maybe 1.5%? And they said, now you can trade all you want. And so the SEC saw it as a sort of amortizing the commission, sort of, kind of aggregating them together. And they said, okay, you can do this within your brokerage business, even though the fee model looks almost precisely like what the RIAs are doing. And so as time passed, more and more firms started doing this. And again, I won't destroy my punchline because I have a fun timeline that I'll show you, but there was a really strong shift in this business. And so it turns out that you're right, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, much less common. The brokerage side of the business was dominant, even as far as back as far as 2007. There was a significant change then that I'll talk about that really shifted things. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's funny. I'll tell more about the history of this paper as I go through it, but that to me was exactly what I thought as well. And it was it's always fun when I'm proven wrong, right? Especially when it leads to an interesting research paper. So, but yeah, no.
Follow-on question.
Of course.
The so-called China wall, does that only separate investment banking from the other services provided by, let's say, Merrill Lynch, whereas this is retail? Is that a different framework?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because the way that these firms structure their brokerage business and their sort of RIA business varies. So some of them have sort of all their registered investment advisors are employees, and others have all their registered investment advisors are independent contractors. So like LPL Financial, which just changed names and I forget what it is, they are the independent contractor model, but others like Merrill, you're an employee. The point being that it varies by company, but more importantly, it's the same guy, right? So the guy has two hats. There's no Chinese wall. When a client walks in, I'm sitting at my Raymond James office in the South Shore Mall, right? A client walks in and I say, hey, let me introduce myself. I'm this guy. Let me tell you, what do you need? And the client will start talking to me, and I can decide whether I want to open a brokerage account for him or a registered investment advisory account because I'm qualified to do both. And make it even crazier, that same client could have a brokerage account with me and a registered investment advisory account with me. Maybe he's got an account where he wants to trade and he wants me to give him some stock tips or whatever, I don't know. And then he's got an account that he wants me to manage in a fiduciary manner. So again, I don't know how often that happens, but it's totally legal. Does that help, Sydney?
It helps. Does the legal profession have a stronger differentiation between different roles that a lawyer can take?
Yes.
In contrast to the financial industry.
Yes. And so the law literature on this space is much bigger than the finance literature. They're very interested in this and conflicts and how all this works. And certainly, because these two parts of the business are often housed inside the same human, right? It's very hard to sort of separate that. But the standards that you're held to as a broker versus an investment advisor do differ. And it's not always clear to the client which account they have, right? There's a fair amount of literature that says clients have no idea if their advisor is a fiduciary. Like most of them don't get it because it's disclosed so poorly, because it's in a 96-page document that they don't read, but it is there. So it is very clear to anyone who understands, how to read a financial statement or look at a brokerage statement versus an RIA statement. It's very clear, the differentiation. It's just not always clear to clients.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. And it really is, there's not only a conflict that's sort of in the RIA business because I have a brokerage business that lets me do stuff, but there's also the conflict I mentioned. I walk in the door and the advisor has to decide, do I want Nicole to be an RIA client or do I want her to be a brokerage client? And more, this is related to Adam's question, the RIA business is more lucrative and it's an annuity, and you can think of all the great ways that you can think of your nice smooth revenues in that business. So more and more clients that may have been better off as a brokerage client, it's kind of a one-off, you want to buy this fund or whatever, end up in RIA accounts. There's a lot of anecdotal kind of press about that. So, and again, I would argue, and my Twitter friends agree, right? So a lot of them used to be brokers, and then now they're independent RIAs, and they're more pure or whatever. But they will argue that when they were brokers, they had no idea the difference. It was just, how are you going to charge fees? You're going to charge assets under management, or are you going to charge a commission? And their bosses were like, dude, if you charge assets under management, you get paid by this guy forever, right? If you charge a commission, you got to go sell something to another guy. So the business became much more focused on the RIA model, but I would argue without the spirit of the fiduciary rule. So
can I ask maybe a follow-on too?
Yes, please.
Is how are the guys compensated? You know, if I'm working, you know, in the different roles that they could be playing, you know, is there more incentive for them to take one role or take another role?
Yeah, so there are different, you know, payment grids that exist for different firms. And if you work for one, you absolutely know how you're compensated. But generally speaking, you either get a chunk of the asset, you either get a chunk of the AUM fee. So say it's 2%, you get, you know, some proportion of that. And, you know, the more assets you have, the bigger your percentage.
Okay.
If it's a brokerage client, then you're going to get a chunk of the commission. My gut tells me, or at least my sort of cursory review of these tells me that you tend to get a higher percentage of the commission, but it's much harder because you have to, you know, what do they say? You got to eat what you kill or whatever, right? So you got to keep going out and finding new clients when you're in a commission model versus the RIA model, which you get them to sign once. And I mean, people are, you know, what entropy, right? People tend to stay where they're sitting. So you don't see a lot of clients moving around. And frankly, they don't always understand it. And this is not me saying clients are stupid, but the disclosures are so difficult to read, and advisors have every incentive to not necessarily highlight all the different aspects of you know, kind of how they're getting paid, such that, you know, the AUM model is almost certainly more lucrative, even after a couple of years than the commission model.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, of course. And I do want to say, though, this is related to your to the questions about how they get paid. And I do want to make an important point, that this revenue sharing, which is, again, to me, kind of the most insidious form of compensation, because it's disclosed very poorly. First of all, you can never find out the amounts, like no one tells you that. And then if you look at the disclosures by the dual registrant, they say, we revenue share with these firms, and, you know, they tell you what it's for. I mean, I'm basically quoting their stuff here using the term kickbacks, which isn't very nice, but they don't use that term, but, you know, revenue sharing, but they don't disclose the amount. And then they'll say, go look at the mutual fund statement of additional information to find out more. And you go to the mutual fund statement of additional information, and they say, you know, we revenue share with some brokers. So it's like the data is really, really, it's not very easy to find. It's certainly not codified in any meaningful way. And so for me, reading these disclosure statements, it was eye-opening. And I learned a lot, and I'm able to do some, I think, pretty convincing analyses, but I still don't really know the dollar amounts, right? So I don't know exactly how this works. But once you recognize revenue sharing exists, one thing I will say is that the individual advisors do not generally get more money if they choose mutual funds that revenue share. So there's not a direct link like, hey, if you sell MFS, you get more cash than if you sell some fund that doesn't revenue share as much. But I will argue, I hope convincingly, that if you are going to seminars that are put on by MFS and you're wearing their hat and you have their coffee mug and they you know, appear on your preferred list, you do have an incentive to sell those funds. And it may not be a direct financial incentive, but certainly this is what you know, and these are the funds you know. And so the revenue sharing, to the credit of most dual registrants, is not sort of explicitly paid, you know, out to the reps. Or I'm calling them reps, that's a broker term, to the advisors. But you certainly have incentives there that are, you know, fairly explicit to sell those funds.
Yeah,
The third, oh yes, please.
Yeah, I was going to say that in my experience, most of the reps slash advisors don't actually know exactly how they're getting paid.
That's right.
There is the grid that you mentioned, and they
Yeah.
know the grid, but it's not a simple lookup table. It's more like a 20-page legal document. And somehow
Yes.
you know that it's based on revenue production, but somehow it's always less than the grid.
It makes total sense, right? And then some of the dual registrants will sort of very like kind of very smugly say like Fidelity's not in my sample because they do too many things and I couldn't cleanly kind of break them out. But you know, my mother-in-law is a Fidelity guy, and I'm sure he's lovely. And but you know, he tells her, I'm paid salary. I don't get paid commissions or whatever. I don't know if he gets bonuses. I don't think he's lying to her. But I think that some firms try harder to make that conflict less kind of salient, and others are much more sort of the old brokerage model, but kind of toned down for the RIA space, or at least adapted.
Yeah, there's definitely a move in the industry to go more towards salary and bonus and less toward production.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And Robert, do you work you obviously sort of know something about the space.
You've done a little bit of work around the space. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no. And it's so interesting, but I agree with that. And I think that some of that is pressure from, you know, just the idea of the sort of regulatory environment. But I think also just the word production is funny to me, right? Like, your clients are production, like you're building a car or something. Like, I'm a fan of cars, but if I buy a car, I know what it looks like, right? If I buy an investment from someone, it's, you know, it's a much harder thing to get your arms around. So yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think that's true. I'm seeing that trend as well. So I've kind of gone over, so two of the conflicts that are here, affiliated funds, I'm not the first person to look at those. I do kind of, the less due diligence is new. Revenue sharing is sort of the heart of what I'm interested in. And then there's a couple others that are really kind of important. So one is this idea of double dipping commissions and asset under management fees. And this happens very kind of explicitly in the mutual fund industry. So I focus a lot on mutual funds, and they show up in the second half of my talk, but they're really important because mutual funds have a commission that's called a 12B1 fee. And a 12B1 fee is a marketing fee that's embedded in the fund expense ratio. It can vary, but typically the funds that the dual registered RIAs, again, this is the fiduciary side of the business, up until 2019, when the SEC cracked down on this, the dual registrants were selling their clients' funds that had an embedded commission, a 12B1 fee, usually 25 basis points. And then they would charge their assets under management fees on top of that. And so they disclosed this, sort of. They disclosed it kind of poorly, which is what the SEC started yelling about. But they were absolutely double dipping commissions and AUM fees. So they were collecting 12B1 fees from mutual funds, keeping those. And the only reason they can do that is because they're a dual RIA and they have a mechanism, their brokerage side of the business, to collect those. So an independent RIA effectively has no mechanism to collect a 12B1 fee. So that conflict, again, I'm being very simple, but that conflict doesn't exist for him. But it absolutely exists in the dual space. And you see this a lot where you've got a dual registered sort of advisor. He was big in the broker business for a while. He's slowly shifting his clients to the asset under management fees, but he's still using the same mutual funds that he used with them. He's just shifting them to a different share class, which often still has a little commission. This 12B1 fee or trail, there's a lot of different names for it. And so this double dipping is a big deal. Firms would disclose it very poorly. We might do this, they would say. And the SEC cracked down in 2019 and said, you guys, if you're doing this, you need to first of all disclose it better. And if you're doing this regularly and you know you're disclosing it poorly, you need to come to us and self-disclose. So there was a self-reporting initiative called the Share Class Disclosure Initiative, and the SEC sort of gave back about $140 million to clients of dual registrants who were choosing mutual funds that paid 12B1 fees over the exact same mutual fund in a different share class that didn't. And so again, none of this was illegal, but the SEC said, you're doing this to your clients and you're not really telling them. So the lesson from that, and I say this all the time when I give this talk, but the lesson from that is you can screw your clients as long as you tell them you're screwing them, right? And the SEC for a long time was kind of cool with that, right? So the SEC was like, yeah, go ahead, just tell them. You're not telling them very well, so tell them better. And so, I don't know, close to 100 firms self-reported. And they're very pleased with themselves for this, I might add, like pat on the back, self-reported and paid back a bunch of money, but they didn't have to pay civil penalties. And so this was pretty smart by the SEC. The pro of all of this is I'm a total cynic. So I'm like, oh, they're just going to keep doing this. Is as a follow-up, is sort of as I finish this paper and send it to a journal, I need to follow up what happened after this. And I am kind of happy to say that most of these firms were pretty frightened by that, and they've effectively stopped doing it. And so I've looked at about 20 of my 75 firms, and every single one of them says, we now try to stop charging 12B1 fees. So we're trying to get rid of those. But if you're in a fund and it has one, and we like the fund and there's not another choice, we're going to rebate it. And so this was me jumping up and down 2 years ago saying, who cares if they charge a 12B1 fee, just rebate it. And so, that's what they're doing now. And so that's good news. The SEC actually made a difference in this disciplinary action. Now they just need to go after revenue sharing and things will get maybe better. But this is what's happening. So the double dipping though was huge in my sample period, 2003 to 2016. And I'll show you numbers in a sec. And then the last thing that really kind of gets to me. So I used to work for a dual registrant, and full disclosure, he was kind of a scumball. So this paper is a little bit of a, hi old boss. But anyhow, he was a big fan of C shares, the mutual funds, right? So mutual fund C shares pay a 1% annual fee out of the fund expense ratio to the broker, right? So very simply put, I'm a broker, I sell a C share. The expense ratio is 1% higher than it would be for a share without that commission. It's a 12B1 fee, comes through the C share, and the broker then collects that 1%. So that to me is a fair comparison for a retail client that's going to be either, treated as an RIA client or a brokerage client. There's a lot of data that says these dual RIAs that are very large don't provide tremendously more service to their RIA side of the business than their brokerage side. Now, for their larger clients, they absolutely do. But for these small clients, if you look at what they're doing, they're effectively putting them into these mutual fund programs, and they're kind of self-balancing, and it's not a lot of hand-holding to your clients. We help you get invested. Not much different than the brokerage side of the business, which again, I have no problem with. But what they're doing is they're charging oftentimes 2 or 2.25% per year. These numbers freak me out. 2 or 2.25% per year to their small clients. And so my proper comparison, I think my best comparison is like a C share of a mutual fund, which again, that's what they used to do for these clients. Now they're putting them in RIA accounts and charging them more. Now that's not perfectly fair. They may well be providing some more service, but I'm not sure they're providing 225% more service. And the other thing I would argue is that there are several of these dual registrants that were doing this. So JP Morgan is notorious for this. Once they decided that the AUM business was big bucks, they just started shifting their clients wholesale. Like they'd call you and be like, hey, guess what? I'm an RIA now. I'm going to switch you to this account. It's 2%, and deal with it. And so this was happening a lot. This is like in the press, it's everywhere. And there are some firms that did this. And then the SEC cracked down and said, you haven't talked to this client for a year. This is not exactly behaving like a fiduciary, right? You're supposed to both help them with the investments and then monitor. The monitoring was like not happening. And so there's plenty of evidence that these firms are charging their retail clients a lot more than they used to charge them. And I would argue for marginally more service. And so these are my really sort of big sort of conflicts that I'm seeing. And I came in here without my phone, so I have no idea what time it is. I don't want to be destroying your lives here. Can you guys, Hugh, where are we on time? I'm so sorry. I usually keep track.
It's 5 minutes made about.
Okay. And I don't want to, I'll go as long as you want me to, but like, no, 15 more minutes. What do you want from me?
It's 7:53.
Okay. And I don't know what time you officially end. I should have asked you this.
It depends, Nicole. We've had sessions which go until like 8:30.
Okay.
But we've also had sessions which are shorter. If you're not doing a formal Q&A at the end, so just take your time.
Yeah. Okay. And again, just drop out if you need to, and I can jump faster too. But I want to answer questions. And I think kind of setting this up is important, thinking about just what these conflicts are. And so again, I'm probably not the first researcher to document some of these conflicts, but I think kind of putting them all together in one place is a useful way to think about them. And so, yes, dual RIAs have more conflicts. And then this one's a really simple slide because of these very specific conflicts, notably fees and commission. This is the double dipping. they've paid $375 million in civil and criminal, but civil penalties and reimbursement during this period, 03 to 21. And then the mutual fund revenue sharing has cost them about $244 million. So the fees and commission, the amount related to that recent initiative is about $140 million. So there's still plenty going on, just dribs and drabs over this period. And then revenue sharing as well. And I show that this is most common among the firms that accept retail clients. Now, I will caveat, these are also the largest firms, so they're going to pay the highest fees. It's hard to disentangle, but certainly the case that these conflicts only exist in dual registrants. They don't exist in independent RIAs. And so this is, I don't know, there's pending about $150 million, so call it $750 million in fees during this period. And we certainly know that the SEC isn't catching everybody. And so these are big dollars that affect clients. Here's our history lesson, and I think this was Art's question about kind of what the heck, what's with this switch going on? Adam, I'm sorry, I called you Art. I was looking at your last name. Adam's question. And so here's some interesting data points. So back in 07, these dual registrants, and again, this is roughly my sample, about 80% of their money came from commission. So you're right, and it's not quite 20 years ago, but getting close. And then as time has passed, this split has changed dramatically. So by 2016, it's about 50-50. 50-50, this is RIA money, the green, and the red is commissions. And so there's been this huge shift since 07, and it's only gotten more dramatic. I think we're at 55 to 60% in 2021. So what the heck happened? So here's what happened. I talked about this briefly, so I'll go over this part quickly. Merrill was charging asset-based fees in their non-fiduciary brokerage accounts, got a no action letter from the SEC and said, it's cool, you can do this. In 1999, the SEC formalized this rule because more and more big brokerage firms were doing this. They had RIA businesses, I might add, but they were tiny, just like Adam said. And so in 1999, the SEC jumped in and said, okay, we're going to formalize this as a rule. And they called it the certain broker dealers deemed not to be investment advisors. Effectively, their fees look like investment advisors. They're not really telling you they're not investment advisors, but you know, they're not. And so they called this the Merrill Lynch rule. In 2004, as you might imagine, a whole bunch of independent advisors, fiduciaries, got angry. This is the Financial Planning Association, and they sued the SEC. And they said this rule is ridiculous. It blurs the lines between brokers and fiduciaries because now that they charge asset-based fees, it's hard for clients to understand the difference. I would say it's always been hard, but it's especially hard here. In 05, kind of despite this pending lawsuit, the Merrill Lynch rule was signed into law. So right, these things take a while. But then in 2007, the FPA actually won their lawsuit. And the SEC said, if you're a broker and you're not dual registered, you need to dual register and then take on RIA clients. If you're already dual registered, you got to move all those brokerage clients over to the fiduciary side of your business if you want to charge asset-based fees. And so effectively, the SEC shut down this kind of loophole, if you like, and said, now you got to be on the up and up. And you need to tell your clients, you know, hey, you were a brokerage client. I'm going to shift you to an RIA client. We're going to keep your fee structure the same as it was before, but now I'm a fiduciary. So if you have questions on that, let me know. But that was the basic setup. And you can see really clearly what happened. After 2007, these big firms were like, fine, we have a RIA side anyway. Let's just start moving our clients over. And so not only were they moving our existing clients, right? They were getting new clients, and most of the new clients that came in were being put into the RIA side of the business. And it's really interesting. I found some old chat boards from like 2007, 2008, and legitimately some of these brokers are saying things like, well, you know, screw the SEC, we'll just become RIAs and move people over. And so a lot of these firms sort of saw it as not a big loss, right? They saw it as an opportunity. And I want to say something like $400 billion shifted over almost immediately at these firms. And I have that data point somewhere. I just don't have it on the tip of my tongue. So this was a big shift. I'm going to pause there if you guys have any questions on that. Because to me, that's fascinating, right? Like it's a lawsuit. The little guys won, but they didn't really win. And so the money's all kind of moving over. And so that's like that's the broker side of the business. I shouldn't say that. That's the dual registrant side of the business, the RIA side of the business, the RIAs that have affiliated brokers. And so what I want to do in the last kind of part of this in my paper, it's kind of in two halves. The first half is I document conflicts, I document this shift, I talk about fees and how these conflicts seem to cause problems. And the second part, what I want to do is kind of show with some, rigor that that not only are these conflicts problematic in terms of sort of higher fees and disclosures and disciplinary actions, but also they seem to affect clients of these firms through the mutual funds that are being selected. And so linking mutual funds to the dual registrant side of the business is an important kind of, an important feature of what I'm attempting to do in this paper. And so I'm going to show you a graph, and this was the graph that started it all. So I made this graph, but there's a very similar graph in the Investment Company Institute mutual fund fact book from, call it, I think, 2017. And what they're showing is the following. And so I'm going to talk about mutual funds as if you guys don't know much about mutual funds. So some of this will be review, but I think I wanted to sort of categorize funds in a certain way. And so here's the story. When you look at mutual fund flows, so we're out of the brokerage business and out of the RIA business, and we're just looking at mutual fund flows right now. Mutual funds tend to be distributed in three ways. One, through brokers. These are broker sold funds, they're load funds, and that's my blue line. And I'm showing flows from 07 through 16. I could go back to 03, but all the action really starts in 07, I argue, because of this change in the law. So broker sold funds are the old ABC shares, MFS, Putnam, all our friends in Boston. Then we have direct sold funds. This is direct DIY investors. Think of Vanguard. And I'm only focusing on active funds here. So I say Vanguard and people think they're not in here, but a third of Vanguard's assets are in active funds. So they're in here plenty. And Vanguard, Vanguard and other direct to consumer distributors. So you're either DIY guy, that's the red guys. You're broker sold, you got a broker, he sells you mutual funds, ABC shares, collects his commissions, and then, he might help you, he might not, doesn't have to, right? It's not his role. And then you've got mutual funds that are distributed by RIAs. Most RIAs that distribute mutual funds are actually selling what's called the institutional share class of the mutual funds. And so MFS, we'll use them as an example, they have a broker sold share class, right? They have a bunch of them, ABC, whatever. And then they also have what's called an institutional share class. And until I started this paper, I thought institutional share class was sold to institutions because that's what it says. But it turns out that institutional share classes are very frequently, in fact, a big chunk of the assets in there are being distributed by registered investment advisors. So round about 2003, 2004, mutual fund families realized that the broker sold model was starting to struggle. They wanted to continue bringing in business. And so a lot of them developed relationships with registered investment advisors. In addition to the load fund families that did this, there are plenty of no load fund families that also have relationships with registered investment advisors. And the share class, so mutual funds are in share classes, right? And the share classes there's one fund, but it has different expenses and loads in the different share classes. So you can think of the load share classes have commissions, the no load or the institutional share classes, better term, have no commissions, generally speaking. You might have a 12B1 fee, but generally speaking, they're going to be distributed through fiduciaries, through registered investment advisors. And so if you look at this graph, remarkable to me, what's happening, 2007, load funds are just going away because one reason is all these dual registered brokers are changing their hat, becoming fiduciaries, right? They're brokers and fiduciaries, but they're focusing on the fiduciary side of the business. So it's a blue hat. And they're selling more institutional share classes to their registered investment advisor clients. Some of these have a 12B1 fee, but I already talked about that. But effectively what they're doing then is they're saying, hey, Joe, you used to have a C share in this fund. Now I'm a fiduciary. I'm going to switch you to my fiduciary account and take you out of the C share. I'm going to put you in the institutional share class. You can see the flipping happening here. And now I'm going to charge you an asset under management fee. That inherently is not bad, except for we know from my prior slide that they are typically charging about twice what they charge for a C share. And it's not obvious they're providing any more service. So mixed in here in this gray line, the institutional share class, you've got both dual registrants and you have straight up fiduciaries who are independent RIAs who aren't doing the switching because they never had the broker side of the business. So they're just showing up and using these funds for their clients. And mutual fund families are smart. They want to continue having assets that are being, sold to their clients. And so they really got heavy into the RIA business. And some of them focus more on the independent, some focus on both, and some focus more on the dual RIAs. But again, this shift here to me was the most interesting thing. And I was wondering what was going on. And so I was eventually able to sort of figure out that a big part of it was this stuff. But to me, the really interesting question is this good or bad for clients, right? So money's going into these institutional share classes that have, at the very least, much lower commissions. Many of them have none, but sort of what's going on with these funds. And so that's kind of the next part of the paper, and it's pretty quick to actually describe it. I just want to stop. So Adam, does that kind of help the story about the shift?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
thank you.
awesome.
Yeah,
And then
I had been unaware of that change over the last 15 or 20 years.
yeah, and it's so interesting because it's like, I was completely unaware of it too. I thought this gray line was like all the good guys. I'm like, all the independent guys are getting in and they're getting, they're good to their clients. They have an incentive alignment. I don't think the independent guys are all good guys either. There's plenty to hate all around, but the dual guys are like my least favorite, right? Because the conflicts are so significant. And it's very clear that this switching is happening. You could almost see it if you break it out in certain ways by fund family, you can almost see like dollar for dollar, right? It's like we're shifting out of load funds. You can tell the dual registrants are just shifting over and saying, okay, we charge fees now, we charge asset-based fees. We're using the same fund. That may be good or bad, depends on whether the fund's any good, but that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. And so then oh yeah, please.
I was just going to say, I don't think it amounts to anything. I see institutional shares often in 401k plans.
Yes.
But, I don't see that there's any inherent problem in that. I always question the choice of funds by
yes.
the plan provider, but yes.
Yeah, there's a great paper. I'll send it to you guys by some of my friends that are at Indiana, and they have a paper effectively that also questions the choice of 401k funds, and they find lots of conflicts there as well, not surprisingly. But I do think that institutional share classes on average are good in the sense that they have lower commissions, if any, and the fees tend to be lower for that reason, right? No embedded commissions, but it's sort of which fund families are offering them and who's distributing them. So this paper is really about distribution, obviously. And so that's kind of what I try to do. And so here's how I sort it out. And I'm being a little bit oversimplified, but the paper has all the gore details. So bear with me on this. But what I do is I take this gray stripy line and I break it into two categories. I break it into fund families that are big revenue sharers. And how do I determine? So I call them a top revenue sharing fund. And here's how we do it. I go through my 75 and it changed, 75 to 100, call it dual registrants. And I read their disclosures, right? A lot of this is hand collected data. That's like what I do, but I read their disclosures, and the ones that say explicitly, we revenue share with MFS, or we revenue share with American funds, or we revenue share with whoever, I just tally those. And so sometimes they're very explicit. We revenue share a ton with American funds and hardly any with this guy. So I do my best to sort it out, but you're determined to be a top revenue sharing fund if you're mentioned the most frequently by these dual registrants. And so I used to have a list of these and I took it out. I need to add it back for talks like this, but I took it out because like half the guys in my audience were at Putnam and MFS. And so I was like, I'm just gonna, sort of brush over that for the moment. But what I find is that the big revenue sharers are families like MFS is a big one, American funds, and I really just do it, are you mentioned most frequently? So it's a count. I think it's a pretty good way to do it. It's the best I can, but it's by far not the cleanest thing in the world, but it's the best I can do with the data I have. And so my argument is that the funds that revenue share the most are going to be preferred by dual registrants because they can benefit from that. And the funds that revenue share the least or not at all, that's mixed in here in the green line, are going to be preferred by the fiduciaries. And so that's my split. And you can see this is cumulative flows. So, call it 50-50. Again, these are accumulated, so they're a little hard to disentangle. But effectively, it's a nice split. So about half the money's going into these top revenue sharing funds who revenue share with a bunch of guys, and the rest of it's going into the ones that revenue share less. And that's my split for the next couple sort of tests that I do. And again, I won't show you tables, but I'll show you the summaries. What I find is that, and again, just think of it as comparing that gray line to the green line. On an annual basis, the flows are much higher for the institutional mutual funds that revenue share with the most RIAs. So in other words, marketing is working, right? We revenue share, we get access to you, and that results in higher flows. 15% higher than direct retail, that's the red line, but 24% higher than that green line, than the ones that revenue share less. And so clearly, I can't ever fully claim causality, but there's a really strong association between revenue sharing and getting flows. And again, these are the fund families, by and large, that were mostly load fund families, right? So I don't split precisely on that, but it's almost exactly what happens. The load fund families revenue share because they've always distributed through brokers. So Joe's my broker, and now he's also an RIA. He's still big buddies with the wholesaler at MFS. And so he's just switching the share class and collecting now fees instead of commissions effectively. And so those funds have the highest flows. That's pretty clear in my data. But here's the sad part. Those funds also have the worst performance. And so their performance is worse than direct retail. That's not overly surprising. The direct retail funds are pretty good, but their performance, the ones that revenue share the most, have performance that's worse than the ones that revenue share the least. And I promise you, this is really rigorous. I do factor models. I'm using gross of fees and net of fees. And I do this in a bunch of different ways. And it always comes out, it's properly done as a pricing models, but it always comes out that these fees are higher for those that revenue share the most. These are the funds that historically were broker sold. And there's literature, my friend Dan Bergstrasser and Diane Del Guercio have a paper from like 2014. That's not Dan. Dan has a different paper. It's John Reuter at BC. And Diane Del Guercio have a paper where they look at load fund families versus no load fund families. My paper is a little bit more, it digs a little deeper, and I'm looking at revenue sharing fund families, the ones that revenue share the most compared to the ones that revenue share the least. And they find that load fund families do worse, and not because of loads, right? They net of loads or gross of loads. They find that the load fund families do the worst. I find the same thing, but I find that it's concentrated among the load fund families that revenue share the most with the dual RIAs. And so it's an important distinction that sort of ties these conflicts to performance in a fairly direct way. And then my last finding looks at affiliated funds. And again, maybe not surprisingly, the affiliated funds do worse than the direct retail funds as well. And so again, these are just kind of summaries. You can look at the tables if you want to get more deep. But what I'm really showing is that this switch kind of from brokerage to the RIA side of the business, what I want to argue is it's the same exact mutual funds, just different share classes, and it's the same exact people, just wearing different hats. And the outcomes for their clients seem to be not good. And so the dual RIAs have conflicts of double dipping, commissions and fees, the revenue sharing, which is really the heart of my paper, and to a lesser degree, affiliated funds. They charge higher fees relative to their brokerage clients. And again, you can very reasonably argue that they might be providing more service. This is among their smaller retail clients. I don't find tremendous evidence of that, but that is, that's caveated. They've paid over $619 million in SEC fees since 2003 in fees related to these direct, unique conflicts that independent RIAs don't have. They use mutual funds that have higher flows, marketing works, but worse returns, and the affiliated funds have worse performance. I'm going to do two caveats and then I want to open it up. But my first caveat, which I've already made, is that I don't think these individual advisors are bad humans. As I'm forgetting your name, as Larry, nope, it wasn't Larry, as Robert said, they don't even know half the time, right? They're just like making a living. And so, I don't think they're bad guys. I think the structure of the firm sets up incentives in ways that make them behave in ways that are not necessarily in the best interest of their clients. my good friend Barb Roper, who just got hired by the SEC, but she was running a company, a nonprofit called the Consumer Federation Association. She always would say to me, fix the incentives and you fix the behavior. And so the incentives are really problematic. And that's really what I'm here to say. The second thing is that the independent RIAs don't get a full pass from me. I mean, of course they have conflicts. They're just not the same as these ones. But the bigger issue is that they won't take on retail clients generally. I understand why, right? You're a small business person. You don't want a client with $10,000. But the retail clients then are stuck in a tough place. They can either DIY, many of them sort of uninformed, unable to do that. They can go to, their buddy at Ray J, or maybe this is where the gap gets filled, they can use a robo. And I'm a fan of the robo advisors in spirit. Betterment, Wealthfront, some of the robos that are coming out, like Vanguard has one now, I think Fidelity as well. The spirit of that is very nice. They're not necessarily serving the same purpose, but just from a pure, do you want a low cost investment portfolio? That is probably a better place to go than walking in the door of Raymond James. And so I do think there's hope. Many of my friends who are independent advisors will push back and say, well, we do take small clients, and they do. They just, it's not their main business. So they'll take a small client that they think might become a big client. A lot of them do pro bono work, right? They're pretty helpful people. But this retail investors who the SEC cares a lot about seem to really be falling through the cracks. And my hope when I started this paper was that institutional funds were the great thing and everybody was charging fees and everything's aligned. But my argument is that the dual registered investment advisors actually may be even more conflicted than on the RIA side than they were on the brokerage side. And I, having worked for a broker who I thought was a pretty scummy guy, I did not expect my research to come down on the side of sort of the brokerage side of his business. But I do think that, brokers get a bad rap. And I think that at least in the brokerage business, if you're not sort of lying about what you're doing for your clients and cheating or overcharging them, the fees were actually better for retail clients kind of in the old load mutual fund era than they are in the 2% per year era. And so these are just really interesting. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you guys. Really interesting kind of dynamics that I see in this space. And so that's kind of, that's my work. I've been working on it for a while, but I think it's just really fun to talk about, especially with folks who have any tangent or direct relationship with the space. So I really appreciate you listening and your participation.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Has any work been done, to your knowledge, on the trading patterns of mutual fund complexes that revenue share? So the revenue share could be direct, as you alluded to, where they aggregate at the company level, but the mutual fund is under obligation to do best execution, but of course, best execution is in the eye of the beholder frequently. So I'm just wondering if there's any data on that, because that might be another sort of preferred relationship that evolves in this model.
It's a really good question. There's not a lot of work on revenue sharing. My paper talks about it, a handful of others, but because it's very hard to just observe, right? None of the standard databases talk about it. So you have to just go and read SEC filings till your eyes are tired. But I agree with you. I think that's a really interesting question. And it's something I might be able to think about with my data, at least at a course level, where I know the ones that revenue share the most. And I'm verifying that from the other side. So when you have two data sets that give you the info, you're much more comfortable with it. So I love the question. And your hypothesis would be then?
The hypothesis that would be that RIA firms, which are RIAs who are brokers who work for a brokerage firm,
right?
The firm receives revenue. The firm makes a referral to the mutual fund complex. It receives a revenue share back, but in addition, it receives back a preferential trading relationship, particularly when, let's say, the the broker's prices are the same.
Yeah, I have to think a little bit about that because I'm just thinking about mutual funds being priced at end of day. So so execution for mutual funds, I get, maybe I'm just misinterpreting, but I'm thinking execution for mutual funds, it's almost impossible to have best execution, but a family that revenue shares that has ETFs or something, you could see that maybe.
Well, a mutual fund, the portfolio manager decides to sell Tesla. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
You mean within the fund? My fault.
So
My fault. Yes.
so the trading desk just goes out and gets some quotes.
Yes, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, obviously, I don't know the answer, but I'm not sure if anyone's done it. But it's a cool question. And sort of sorting on revenue sharing is, I think, gives you a little extra. It links the two really nicely. So it's a great question. I'll definitely think about that. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah.
I have a question. I have a friend who's, for the past couple of years, he's been working for one of those firms on your first list. Mentioned,
but he's not here.
But I've learned a lot about, he's pretty good. We've always talked about, how he's making money and what, what's going on. And the firm seems to, we'll say the firm is located in St. Louis.
Okay.
Okay. So he's always talking about what they do in St. Louis. And, for the first year, he was supposed to literally go out and knock on doors.
Wow.
And ring bells and try to talk to people. And, he lives in some affluent community up a little outside of Boston. But one of the things that I learned from him was it seemed like he had to increase the size of his total assets, like under management, if you want to call it, every year. If he didn't, then the mothership would be, either scolding him or taking away his salary. I don't quite understand the true compensation model, but how does that work into all of this?
Do you know if he was a broker or a fiduciary, or was he a dual-headed guy?
I don't know. I'm going to ask that question.
See, and so what's so funny, it's such a good question, right? Because honestly, no one cares. I care a lot, but I spend so much time reading popular press that talks about financial advisors, and legit, they never tell you. So every time I read an article, I'm like, are these the brokers or these RIAs? Are these For like 4 months, I didn't believe that RIA firms could get revenue sharing. And I was convinced that I was right. And then I kept reading and kept reading. I was like, no, it's the whole business. And of course they do. And look, the SEC is busting them for it. So the answer is, I don't know, but we can point to things like Wells Fargo, employees making fake accounts so that they wouldn't lose their jobs. And so none of this surprises me. And I think that certainly, again, if the incentives are you have to grow at a certain rate or whatever, I mean, it's I don't know. It's a very interesting link because the whole idea of fiduciary is so beautiful, and it's George Putnam, and it's like goes back to and Brandeis, all these people, I love them. But then you see how it's being kind of treated now as basically like, I would bet money if you talk to 100 dual registrants and ask them to talk about what a fiduciary means versus a broker, they'd say fiduciary charges assets under management fees and brokers charge commissions.
Yeah. The other thing that he actually says, he spends probably more time helping people with problems that have nothing to do with their portfolios.
Well, he might be an RIA then. So most of the really good independent RIA, he may work for the evil firm. A lot of those guys are good, especially the high net worth clients. So I have friends who are high net worth clients of some of these firms, and I start telling about my research and they start freaking out. And I'm like, let me look at your portfolio. Their portfolio is fine. It's low cost ETFs or whatever. I'm like, do you talk to this person? Do they help you with advising? Yes. Like, you're fine. It's the smaller clients that really are just kind of being run through the mill.
Okay. All right.
And I can't tell you exactly how many small clients they have either, but it's not zero, so.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
So Larry, I don't think that the problem isn't so much the growing the assets every year, because you kind of expect them to do that. It's opening new accounts, mostly for the same clients, in different types of accounts. So do you have a credit card with us? Do you have a mortgage with us? And every time you call up your Merrill Lynch guy, because you have a question about how the market did, he's got a screen that pops up and says, Larry doesn't have a platinum card yet. Get him a platinum card. And then your rep or advisor he's not going to tell you that. He just clicks and says dismiss that. But it's a lot of pressure to open up and cross sell different kinds of accounts.
Yeah, I find it really interesting to know a little bit what goes on behind the screen. So thank you for this paper. I look forward to reading the paper.
Yeah, no, hopefully you'll find it interesting. And if you have questions or something's unclear, I'm revising it. I've updated the fees, and then I'm also updating the, to sort of say like, look, SEC came and cracked down on this practice, and the practice is gone now. So bravo, SEC, go crack down on some other stuff. And so my thought process is really, if you properly incentivize people not to do stuff, they're not. So, these firms are nervous now about the double dipping. They effectively, if you read what they talk about, they're like, we're pretty sure that the SEC, no matter how well we disclose it, isn't going to let us do it. So,
and you wouldn't mind if I shared your slides with him?
Oh my gosh, not at all, not at all.
Okay. Thanks again.
Yeah, no, of course. It was really, really fun. I had a great time, and all your questions are helpful, and feel free to email me or whatever afterwards. This paper has been my passion project for a while, and I've gotten away from it. So I'm presenting it tomorrow to my students just because we're talking about conflicts in my alternative investments class. And so it was great to dry run it with you guys. So I haven't looked at it for a little while. So I think
I don't know. I may be the only one here who is an independent RIA, but it certainly helped me to understand my competition.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I never know what the backgrounds are. I love that. So at least you got the good guy label from me. So I presented this at an industry conference, and it was like, I don't know, 400 or 500 independent RIAs and 20 dual registrants. I was happy it was not the reverse, but you read these ADV forms, part 2 ADV, and these things are, I would say this, I said this to them. I said, I'd read a few forms and then have to go take a shower. I mean, right. This stuff some of it's really sleazy. So it's something else,
Yeah. Have you looked at the part 3s now where
the form CRS?
So yeah, and it looks like the way the instructions are written, you have to put so much information in there, and it has to be one page. I can't remember if it's front or back.
Yeah.
You're limited to the amount of physical real estate, but to actually fully explain the information, you can't do it.
It's terrible.
It cannot be filled out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on record jumping. Yeah, I have a couple. Jason Zweig from the Wall Street Journal. He's my fave, and so I have a couple fun quotes in articles he's written where I say things like, whatever. I say things that are sarcastic and funny, and he likes those. But I'm mostly saying what you're saying. And so the first thing I said was, as soon as I saw it, I said, they're just going to hyperlink their homepage, right? And that's what they do. Go to merrilllynch.com. Have you been to merrilllynch.com? You're going to find that stuff.
I thought it was great when I first heard about it, until I tried to write one and said, oh yeah, this is garbage.
Yeah, and it's not the fault of the people who have to write it. The SEC just watered everything down so much and made it impossible wish list of the stuff they want. I read it too. I'm like, this doesn't help anybody. And they focus, they tested some of this stuff and found that people didn't get it, but they still were like, we must forge on. So anyway, yeah, I'm with you. The part 3s are like, I am reading them in my second round, and I'm just falling asleep. So. So thank you, Hugh and Sri.
All right. Well, thank you, Nicole.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much. Nicole, if you can share the slides.
Of course.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have the paper. And like I said, I'll forward you, Hugh and Sri, the paper I was talking about with the 401k plan, because it's a great paper and it's really interesting, and it really kind of complements the conflicts story, right? Conflicts are everywhere, right? So you have to know where to look.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you
All right.
again.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.